wait a minute, a horror film that won the Grand Jury Prize at Sundance? I gotta see this. Nanny is a 2022 movie about an immigrant woman who takes a job as a nanny for a wealthy New York City family, but begins to experience strange visions. There are some movies that are sort of easy to review, right? Like they're good or bad, and it's kind of very clear from the start to finish as to where they're going to fall in that category. And then there are ones that are much harder to kind of nail down. This is sort of one of those movies. The movie begins with Aisha, who is an immigrant from Senegal, who has moved to the US in order to make a better life for both her and her 5-year-old son. Now, her son is currently back home while she earns enough money to bring him here. And this is her first day of work. Now, I kind of wish we weren't jumping into this story on this day. Like, I almost wish the story had started at the job interview level so that we kind of would get an idea as to like who she is as a person before the job and to kind of get her fears and kind of played that up a little bit, as opposed to sort of right out of the gate, her introduction is she's already gotten the job and she seems kind of pretty confident in doing that. There's the one line from her aunt who talks about how like basically like don't screw this up.
I pray for you, eh? Just work hard to keep it. Jobs like this, they don't fall from the sky.
Anyway, on her first day of work, we are introduced to the mother of the family, Amy, who is played by the always awesome Michelle Monaghan. And we see that Amy is a little OCD. I mean, she's got everything kind of mapped out to the nth degree inside of this particular binder to keep track of all of the comings and goings. And this is kind of like the first time that she's had a nanny before as well. So you can see that there is like a clear awkwardness here, but the vibe seems generally good. And things are good for a little while. I mean, they settle into a routine, but oddities begin to arise as Aisha starts experiencing these kind of strange visions. Most of them centered around water, whether there's the shower is constantly being turned on, or she dreams of being rained on, or there is the ceiling that is leaking. It all kind of centers around water. At the same time, Amy starts behaving kind of erratically as she begins coming home late without calling and becomes sort of more and more distant when she is home. And that's sort of one of the things that I thought rang a little false in this movie, which is the personality of Amy specifically. Now, Amy unfortunately draws kind of the short straw in this movie of being sort of whatever the plot demands the character to be. Because at first, she is like super type A, borderline OCD, and has everything laid out and organized. But then later on, she's kind of sloppy and non-attentive and disregards a lot of the situations around her. She takes Aisha for granted and like doesn't pay her for weeks for some reason, doesn't buy food for her family and her child, etc., etc. And it's all kind of because the plot sort of just needs her to be an obstacle in Aisha's life. And it doesn't seem to make sense for the character, as the character kind of seesaws back and forth between the way she's introduced and sort of the way she ends up being. Now, this sort of erratic behavior forces Aisha to seek out the help of the husband, Adam, and this sets in motion like a whole other set of circumstances with him. Now, Adam is, I think, a photojournalist. I don't think it's ever explicitly said, but I guess I'm guessing that from the photos in his office that he took. And he's kind of just gone for stretches of time, and he ends up being sort of the only person that is paying attention to Aisha's concern and someone that she continues to kind of go back to plead her case. However, there also is an issue with that, with the fact that Adam seems to be having affairs all over the city and also makes a move on Aisha herself. But none of this actually has much to do with the main story, though. I mean, at least what the movie ends up deeming the main story to be. These visions continue to happen to Aisha and progressively get worse, punctuated by the appearance of Anansi the Spider, which is a trickster entity from a children's book. At the same time, she starts dating Malik the doorman in the family's building. He introduces her to his grandmother that also has a belief in dark magic, and she gives Aisha some context as to kind of what she thinks is happening to her with all these visions. I stress some context.
Some believe that the mermaid lures sexuality, money, and promises of fertility. But They're very dangerous, unpredictable, and impermanent.
Because here's the issue. This is a slow burn story, which is both good and bad. I mean, good because I love a slowly building story and sort of letting a story unfold naturally and take its time. But in this case, it's kind of not so good because it also seems to meander a little bit too much. I mean, this movie is only an hour and 39 minutes long, but it feels so much longer. Mainly because it really doles out the plot progression very slowly. All said and done, I still don't really fully understand the entire story and what actually happened. I mean, maybe it's my ignorance of the folklore of the mermaids or the Anansi the spider tale, but it all felt largely unexplained, and it ends up feeling really diluted for most of the movie. It tries to have so many different story threads going at one time. I mean, there's trying to have a relationship with her son, there's starting to get a new job, a lecherous husband, a wife and mother that is overworked and absent, a child that starts experiencing whispers of an unknown entity, the start of a new relationship, the manipulative structure of rich versus poor, women trying to overcome the boys' club at work, and mermaids. It all feels like a little too unfocused from a narrative point of view. So much so that by the halfway mark of the story, I still didn't really have any idea where this movie was going because it had so many balls in the air. You would think that that would help the slower pacing that I mentioned earlier, but it really doesn't. See, the trick of pacing is that good pacing doesn't necessarily mean lots of things happen, but it's more that things happen in a way that keep you engaged and drive the narrative forward. Like, lots of things can happen, but if it doesn't feel like it's going anywhere or the breadcrumbs are sort of too small to follow, it's hard to stay with it. The biggest problem here is by the time it comes into focus, it's the end of the movie. And so its conclusion ends up feeling super rushed and unsatisfying given how much time we've actually spent on some of these threads. The movie's very well shot, with a creepy, foreboding atmosphere, and where all of the leads deliver excellent performances. But whether you like this movie or not is really going to hinge on whether you can be okay with watching kind of a bunch of events happen without much of an obvious connection. It's almost a slice of life style film, but they just wanted to inject some horror into it. And I'm just not sure that works here. Strange things happen and are terribly vague, and even kind of putting them together after the fact is a bit of a tough task. It ultimately does make sense, I guess, but there is some heavy twisting that has to be done to make it really work. I wish they had dropped some of the different story threads and focused on just one or two of them exclusively and fleshed them out for a more pointed view. I'd give this movie a B-, but let me know what you think.